So I sold his rare comic book collection to pay for the initial retainer to divorce him. Yeah, you heard that right. His precious, pristine, first editions, sealed in plastic comic books gone. Was I wrong for what I did? Honestly, tell me if you would have done the same thing since. Because I've replayed it 1,000 times in my head, and every single time, I come to the same conclusion: he deserved it. Absolutely deserved it. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I actually thought Mark was the man I was going to spend the rest of my life with. We met in college. A classic meet cute at a campus coffee shop. I was struggling with an essay, he offered to help, and sparks, as they say, flew. Mark was charming, witty, and incredibly passionate about his hobbies, which even then primarily revolved around his burgeoning comic book collection. I found it endearing at first, this boyish enthusiasm. He had a small collection then, just a few long boxes tucked away in his dorm room, but he spoke about them with such reverence, like they were ancient artifacts. I, on the other hand, was always more practical. My passion was in my career, in building something tangible. We were, in many ways, opposites. But back then, it felt like we complemented each other. He brought a sense of fun and wonder to my life, and I, perhaps, brought a bit of grounding to his. Fast forward 10 years, and that small collection had blossomed into a monstrous, all-consuming obsession that dominated our spare room, our finances, and ultimately, our marriage. We had a beautiful house, a comfortable life, or so I thought. I was a successful marketing executive, bringing in a significant income. Mark, after dabbling in a few different fields, had settled into a somewhat lackadaisical job in IT. One that paid the bills but certainly didn't contribute much to our lifestyle beyond his own personal spending. His hobby, however, was a bottomless pit. Every bonus I received, every raise, a good chunk of it would inexplicably vanish. I'd ask Mark about our savings, about our joint account, and he'd always have a vague answer. A promise that he was investing wisely, or that things were tight this month. I trusted him. I really did. I believed in the sanctity of our partnership, that we were a team, working towards a shared future. The collection grew. It wasn't just long boxes anymore. We had custom-built, climate-controlled display cases. He had a dedicated insurance policy for the Ort. He spent hours researching market values, attending conventions, bidding online. It was less a hobby and more a full-time job, one that yielded no discernible income for us, only for him and his ever-expanding universe of caped crusaders and cosmic beings. Our conversations became less about our day, our future, our dreams, and more about the latest acquisition, the pristine condition of a new find, the potential resale value of some obscure issue, distance. I started to feel like a secondary character in his own self-narrated epic, a supporting role to his main quest, the ultimate comic book collection. I tried to talk to him about it, gently at first. Mark, don't you think we should focus on saving for a bigger down payment on a new house? Or, honey, that new display case cost a fortune. Couldn't we have put that towards a vacation? He'd shrug, or give me that patronizing smile and say, "You just don't understand, babe. This is an investment, a real asset. An asset that was draining our shared resources and my emotional energy, I thought, but I kept it to myself. I still loved him, or at least, I loved the idea of the man I married. The real turning point, the moment the scales truly fell from my eyes, happened about a year ago. My mother, bless her heart, had been battling a long illness. The medical bills were piling up, and I was doing my best to help her out, financially and emotionally. I approached Mark, explaining the situation, asking if we could dip into our joint savings, just for a short while, to cover some of her urgent expenses. He looked at me, a flicker of something I now recognize as annoyance in his eyes, and said, "Look, I'd love to help, but we're a bit tight right now. You know, with the new Detective Comics Fen 27 I just picked up. That set me back a pretty penny. It's a key issue, though, so it'll appreciate in value." My jaw practically hit the floor. He had just spent thousands on a comic book, while my mother was struggling to pay for her medication. The audacity, the sheer selfishness, was a punch to the gut. I tried to argue, to make him see reasons, to remind him of his responsibilities not just to me, but to my family. He just retreated behind a wall of investment opportunities and future security, talking about how this comic book was more stable than the stock market. That night, I cried myself to sleep, a bitter realization dawning on me his comics came before everything and everyone. They certainly came before me. That incident planted a seed of resentment that began to grow, slowly but surely, into a full-blown conviction that something had to change. I started paying closer attention to our finances, to the statements, to the vague explanations. What I discovered was a systematic siphoning of our joint funds into his personal comic book empire. He wasn't just spending his own money, he was spending our money, my money, without my consent, under the guise of investments. He had even taken out a small loan against our home equity, specifically to purchase a particularly rare collection of Golden Age comics, a loan I only discovered when a statement arrived in the mail addressed to both of us. The level of deception was staggering. He had become a master manipulator, cloaking his obsession in a veil of financial shrewdness, all while I was working my tail off, believing we were building a future together. We were building his future, one panel at a time. I confronted him. It wasn't a calm, rational discussion. It was an explosion. I laid out all the evidence I had painstakingly gathered, the bank statements, the loan documents, the countless online auction receipts. He denied everything at first, then tried to gaslight me, saying I was overreacting and didn't understand how valuable these truly were. He even suggested I was being unsupportive of his passion. That was the final straw. His inability to acknowledge his wrongdoing, his refusal to see how deeply he had hurt and betrayed me, sealed his fate in my mind. I told him I wanted a divorce. He scoffed, thinking it was an empty threat, a temporary fit of anger. He told me I wouldn't do it, that I was too dependent on him. That was another fatal mistake on his part. He had no idea the fire he had just ignited. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. I was left with little access to readily available funds, because he had essentially cleared out our savings for his latest acquisitions, and I needed a substantial amount for an initial retainer for a good divorce lawyer. The best ones aren't cheap. And I knew I couldn't afford to skimp if I wanted a fair settlement and to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Faced with a husband who had betrayed your trust, financially and emotionally, and left you in a difficult position to even begin to fight for yourself, what would your next move have been? Would you have found another way? Or would you have gone straight for his most prized possession? I started researching divorce lawyers, and the retainer fees were daunting. Every consultation left me feeling more defeated. I needed a significant sum, and fast. I looked at our joint accounts, what little was left. I looked at my own personal savings, which I had been trying to build up for a rainy day that had clearly arrived. And then, my eyes landed on them. The glowing, climate-controlled display cases in what used to be our guest bedroom, now the comic book vault. There they stood, pristine, untouchable, each one a monument to his betrayal. His most valuable, most cherished comics. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that these were the key. These were his Achilles' heel. He had invested so much in them, not just financially, but emotionally. They were his identity, his pride, his sacred cows. And I realized, with a grim satisfaction, that they were also my leverage. I spent the next few days planning, meticulously. I couldn't just walk into a comic book store and unload them. These were rare. They needed to be appraised, authenticated, and sold through the right channels to get their true value. I found an independent appraiser, claiming I was helping a friend liquidate a collection. I took photos, careful not to reveal too much, and got a preliminary valuation. The numbers were staggering. Tens of thousands for just a handful of his most prized possessions. My heart hammered as I thought about what I was about to do. It felt like walking a tightrope distance, knowing there was no going back once I started. One Tuesday, Mark went on his annual comic book pilgrimage to a convention a few states away. He'd be gone for 3 days, giving me a perfect window. I called the appraiser again, now revealing my true intent. He was a bit shocked, but professional. Distance. He connected me with a reputable online auction house specializing in rare collectibles. I carefully, meticulously, selected a dozen of his most valuable comics, the ones he kept under lock and key, the ones he boasted about the most, the ones he believed were irreplaceable. Action Comics Phase 1, a Superman High 1, a Batman High 1, and several other key issues. My hands trembled as I carefully, almost reverently, removed them from their display cases. Feeling the weight of my decision in each plastic, sleeved cover, I packaged them securely, arranged for an expedited, insured shipment to the auction house, and provided them with all the appraisal documentation. The instructions were clear: sell them, discreetly, and deposit the funds into my personal account. It was a substantial sum, more than enough for the retainer, and then some. I felt a surge of power, a sense of reclaiming control that I hadn't felt in years. When Mark returned, he was exuberant, full of stories about his convention finds. He went straight to his vault, as always, to admire his treasures. I was in the living room, pretending to read, my heart pounding in my chest. I heard a sudden, guttural roar, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage and disbelief. "Comus! Within a Y, S!" he screamed. He burst into the living room, his face a mask of fury, eyes wild. "What did you do with them? Where are my comics?" I looked at him, calmly, deliberately, and said, "I sold them, Mark, to pay for my divorce lawyer's retainer. Consider it an advance on my share of the marital assets." His face went from purple rage to a ghostly white. He tried to argue, to threaten, to scream about theft, about how I had destroyed his life's work. I just presented him with the official letter from my lawyer, informing him of the divorce proceedings, and a printout of the deposit confirmation from the auction house. The look on his face, the utter devastation as he realized the finality of what I had done, was a sight I will never forget. He tried to report them stolen, but the auction house had all the necessary documentation, including a signed affidavit from me stating that I had legal right to sell them as part of our marital assets, which technically I did. The funds were already in my account, the retainer paid. His beloved comics were gone, scattered to various collectors across the globe. The divorce was messy, as expected, but the initial shock of the comic book sale certainly set the tone. He was furious, vindictive, but also, in a strange way, subdued. He had lost his ultimate power play, his perceived untouchable asset. The sale of those comics not only funded my legal battle, but also sent a very clear message. I was not to be underestimated, and I would fight for what was mine. In the end, I got a fair settlement, and he was left with a collection significantly diminished in value, and, more importantly, with the crushing blow to his ego. He never quite recovered from the loss of those key issues, those symbols of his carefully constructed world. Looking back, I have no regrets. Absolutely none. He spent years prioritizing his inanimate objects over our relationship, over my needs, over our shared future. He used our money, my money, to fuel his obsession, leaving me financially vulnerable when I needed help the most. My actions were a direct consequence of his choices. I fought fire with fire, and in doing so, I reclaimed my power, my independence, and my sanity. It was an act of self-preservation, a desperate measure taken by a woman pushed to her absolute limits. I came out of that marriage stronger, wiser, and with a clear understanding of what I would never tolerate again. It was a harsh lesson, learned at a steep price, but one that ultimately set me free. So, that's my story. I know it sounds extreme, but sometimes extreme circumstances call for extreme measures. What do you all think? Was I justified in what I did? Or did I go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you were on my side, and subscribe for more stories like this. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'll see you all in the next story.